Have you ever wondered how the human brain remains an enigmatic puzzle? How does our small brain store such vast amounts of knowledge? How is our mind so powerful? The human brain is so mysterious that experts in various fields like neurology and psychology have been attempting to understand it for years, yet much remains beyond our grasp. Most of us are not well informed about brain damage. We only come to know about brain-related conditions when we encounter a case firsthand. Surprisingly, in several unique cases, patients have developed peculiar mental disorders due to brain tumors or head injuries, leading to the cessation of functionality in certain parts of the brain. This book discusses Patients with Extraordinary Conditions, authored by Dr. Oliver Sacks, who is not only the author, but also an expert neurologist. In this book, he shares stories of such patients that leave readers astounded. So let's read this book and attempt to understand how powerful the human brain is. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Have you ever thought about what it would be like if you couldn't remember people's faces? Imagine seeing someone, smiling at them, starting a conversation, but as soon as they leave, you forget their face entirely. Has this ever happened to you? It's strange, isn't it? The person you were just talking to a minute ago suddenly becomes a stranger. Unfortunately, some unlucky individuals are forced to live with this condition due to a malfunction in their visual processing. This happens when they suffer a severe head injury or become victims of an accident. These patients' brains cannot process faces, so they try to recognize people through specific features like dimples on both cheeks or a mole on the nose. Mr. P, a renowned musician and teacher, claimed he recognized his students by their voices rather than their names, which many found amusing and odd. Sometimes, Mr. P even treated inanimate objects as if they were humans, talking to doorknobs or fire hydrants as though they were people. He was diabetic and feared becoming blind, so he visited an ophthalmologist. The expert confirmed that his eyes were perfectly fine and suggested that Mr. P should consult a neurologist instead. This led to the meeting between Dr. Sacks and Mr. P. Initially, Dr. Sacks didn't find anything unusual about him, but as their conversation progressed, he noticed Mr. P studying his face intently, looking at his left eye, then his right eye, and then his chin, but Mr. P couldn't see Dr. Sacks's face all at once. Dr. Sacks found this peculiar. He performed some routine examinations on Mr. P, like checking muscle strength, coordination, and reflexes. He asked Mr. P to take off his left shoe and then put it back on, but Mr. P couldn't do it. When Dr. Sacks helped him, Mr. P said, "I have my shoe on," to which Dr. Sacks pointed at the floor and said, "Your shoe is still on the floor." Mr. P pointed at Dr. Sacks' foot and said, "Oh, I thought that was my foot." Apart from these oddities, Dr. Oliver found nothing wrong with Mr. P. He then showed Mr. P a picture from a magazine and asked him to describe it. Mr. P could mention the color, shape, and small features, but he couldn't grasp what the picture was as a whole. Dr. Sacks then asked him to describe a picture of the Sahara Desert, and Mr. P said, "There's a river and a small guest house there," surprising Dr. Sacks because there was nothing of the sort. Mr. P thought Dr. Sacks was impressed by his answer. When Mr. P got up from his chair, he was looking for his hat. His wife was sitting in the chair, waiting for him, when suddenly Mr. P grabbed her head, trying to put it on his own, thinking it was his hat. Indeed, Mr. P had mistaken his wife for his hat. Dr. Sacks visited Mr. P at his home for examinations. Although Mr. P could remember shapes and cartoon characters, he forgot the names of the people living in his apartment shown in pictures. He couldn't remember the names of his co-workers and students. If Mr. P knew someone, he remembered them by a specific facial feature. He viewed things through clues or unique features because he couldn't understand the whole picture. The man who fell out of bed. We often forget how complex our brain is. This small part inside our skull stores millions of memories, remembers countless names, and holds information from all around the world. We depend on our brain for every piece of information we need. Although medical science today can easily identify brain-related problems, which wasn't the case 100 years ago, numerous mysteries of the human brain remain unsolved. A blood clot in the brain or an air bubble in a brain's blood vessel can become a serious problem. Even a minor injury in a small part of the brain can affect the entire body because every part of the body is connected to the brain. We must not forget that our brain is the control center of our body. Once, Dr. Sachs visited a young man in his room who seemed normal until he went to sleep. The man reported that another doctor had diagnosed him with a lazy left leg. When he woke up, he found himself on the floor, refused to get back into bed, and stared at his left leg for a long time. Dr. Sachs urged him to return to bed, but the man vehemently refused, claiming there was a severed human leg on the bed. He was terrified, and before Dr. Sachs could respond, the man said in fear, "Why is this strange, cold leg on my bed? It seems like some nurse played a dangerous joke on me." He believed that a nurse, perhaps intoxicated during the New Year's Eve celebrations, had pranked him. "I think the nurse must have brought a severed leg and placed it on my bed," said the patient with a sense of pride, as if he had solved a mystery. Suddenly, he threw the leg, which only he could see, off the bed. His lips trembled with fear, and he kept saying that the leg was following him because it had stuck to his body. He attempted to separate the leg, which was actually his own, from his body. The man screamed in fear until Dr. Sachs intervened to explain that it was his own leg. However, the man was not ready to believe Dr. Sachs, thinking he was making fun of him. It took a long time before he finally realized it was indeed his own leg, which he thought belonged to someone else. He told Dr. Sachs that the leg felt alien to him. Dr. Sachs asked, "If it's someone else's leg, then where is yours?" The look on the man's face was priceless, and he quietly said, "My leg is missing, and I can't find it." On the level. As everyone knows, we have 5 senses. Yet, there's another sense that works unconsciously and automatically. Some people refer to it as the 6th sense. This sense helps you understand the positioning of your body, like where your hands are relative to your sides or ensuring your body is properly shaped. This sense is known as proprioception. We often take proprioception for granted because it doesn't seem to require our attention until it's missing. It's similar to how we only realize the importance of breathing when we have trouble with it. Dr. Sachs met Mr. McGregor at a retirement village's neurology clinic. Mr. McGregor complained that people said he walked tilted to one side, although he felt he was walking straight. To investigate, Dr. Sachs asked Mr. McGregor to walk in a straight line and recorded him. Despite being 93, Mr. McGregor was very alert and didn't look his age. He confidently stood up and started walking. But Dr. Sachs saw that he was not walking straight. He was, indeed, leaning to one side. What people were saying was true. Mr. McGregor was shocked when he saw the video of himself walking because he couldn't feel the tilt. Dr. Sachs explained proprioception to him. Mr. McGregor tried to grasp the concept and said, "Everyone has a little voice in their head that tells them not to lean to the side and to walk straight, but my mind doesn't have that voice." Dr. Sachs understood what the old man meant. Mr. McGregor also mentioned that his problem might partly be due to his previous work as a carpenter. He used a tool called a spirit level, which helps carpenters know if a surface is level. Parkinson's disease had impaired Mr. McGregor's natural spirit level. Dr. Sachs and Mr. McGregor worked together to address this problem. They fixed an extended horizontal level to both sides of Mr. McGregor's eyeglasses to help him realize when he was tilting. Initially, it was challenging because Mr. McGregor had to check the level frequently, but he soon got used to it, and finally, he managed to walk straight. Eyes right. Treating cases like Mr. McGregor's is quite challenging because they are unaware of their own problems. It requires a lot of patience to work with them and explain their issues. Then, it's about convincing the patient to solve the problem, finding a method or tool that best suits them, something they can easily adopt and turn into a habit. You might not believe it, but some people can only see with one eye. This isn't due to blindness, but because of damage to the vision controller in their brain. To see on the other side, patients need to turn around completely, a full 360 degrees, to get a full view. People with this problem can use CCTV cameras to see around them. Since only one eye works, they need some tool to assist them. Mrs. S. suffered a severe stroke that affected her right eye's cerebral hemisphere. She couldn't see anything with her left eye. She often complained to the nurse that her food tray lacked dessert, although the dessert was always on the left side of the tray. Mrs. S.'s nurse repeatedly reminded her that it was right there. She could only see her nurse if she turned her head and looked with her right eye. The stroke caused Mrs. S. to be unaware of anything on her left side, and she would only apply makeup to the right side of her face, leaving the other side makeup-free. Mrs. S. adopted the turning in circles technique so she could see things on her left. Despite this, she often made mistakes because all her impulses automatically went to the right side. When Dr. Sachs set up a video camera for Mrs. S. so she could see her face's left side, Mrs. S. became even more upset and refused to look to the left side. The President's Speech. Aphasia is a condition where a person has difficulty understanding and speaking words. People with aphasia can't comprehend what is being said to them. Detecting aphasia is not straightforward. It's a long and exhausting process. Neurologists check if the patient is behaving oddly or speaking in a strange way without any expression or emotion. Some aphasic patients might even speak in a robotic voice. Since aphasic patients have trouble understanding words, they rely on nonverbal cues. They interpret someone's intentions based on voice tone, body language, and facial expressions. They can easily discern whether someone is lying or telling the truth, distinguishing between genuine and deceitful persons. Another extraordinary condition of the brain is agnosia, which is the opposite of aphasia. In agnosia, patients can only understand words. They don't grasp the tone or feelings behind the words and cannot comprehend non-verbal cues. Once, in a hospital ward, patients with aphasia were watching the president's speech on TV and were bursting into laughter. They didn't understand a word of the president's speech, but could tell from his expressions that he was lying. There were also patients with agnosia watching the TV. One of them was Emily. a former school teacher with agnosia. She didn't like the president's voice tone, body language, or facial expressions. Emily found the president's speech utterly nonsensical. She was not impressed at all and said, "Perhaps the president has a brain damage problem, or he is hiding something." Yes, father-sister. Unfortunately, there are many reasons for brain damage, such as a major accident or Parkinson's disease, a degenerative disease. Despite countless research on the human brain, many factors remain a mystery to us. Our brain is so complex that damage to any part of it significantly affects the human body. For instance, if the frontal lobes are covered with cancerous tissues, the patient may experience personality changes, a condition for which there is still no cure. Mrs. B, a former research chemist, experiences sudden mood changes. One moment she's funny, and the next she becomes extremely angry. These changing moods pose a big problem for her friends and family. They feel like Mrs. B has changed, that she doesn't care about anyone anymore. But they are unaware that a brain tumor is causing sudden changes in Mrs. B's personality. One day, Dr. Sachs met Mrs. B. While they were talking, she addressed him as father, sister, or doctor. When Dr. Sachs asked why, Mrs. B explained that Dr. Sachs' face and beard reminded her of a priest, and his clothes resembled those of a nun. However, when she saw his stethoscope, she called him doctor. Mrs. B mentioned that it didn't really matter to her, although she knows that a doctor, priest, and nun are different. This was Mrs. B's outlook. Nothing really mattered to her because, in her eyes, everything was the same. She also said she didn't mind seeing everyone as alike. Hands. Imagine your exams are approaching, and you're very nervous because the grades are important to you. You try to study, but you can't concentrate on the book. Everything you read seems to slip away from your mind. You keep thinking you will fail the exams. The fear of failing prevents you from studying. You're so stressed that you can't understand anything. You find yourself unable to do anything, despite wanting to. This shows how powerful thoughts can be. When you believe you can't achieve something, it really happens. If your mind thinks negatively about a task, your body won't cooperate. Madeline is 60 years old and has cerebral palsy. She is blind and frail. Madeline can't perform any tasks because of her constant hand movements. She has been completely dependent on her family since birth. Her hand condition also made it difficult for her to read Braille. If she wanted to read something, she had to depend on others. Dr. Sachs was surprised to learn about Madeline's serious problem. Madeline could feel everything with her hands: light touch, pain, temperature. However, she couldn't recognize things, even Dr. Sachs' hands, which was surprising. Dr. Sachs thought that if Madeline could feel sensations, why couldn't she recognize objects by touch? Then, Dr. Sachs realized Madeline never learned to use her hands because her family did everything for her. Everyone thought Madeline's constantly moving hands were useless. That's why Madeline never had the chance to explore things with her hands. Going against one's beliefs is difficult. Madeline had believed for years that her hands were useless. So, Dr. Sachs came up with a simple plan. He asked the nurse to intentionally place Madeline's food tray just out of her reach. When Madeline became very hungry, she didn't wait for the nurse, but reached out for her food tray herself. For the first time in 60 years, Madeline used her hands. After this experiment, Madeline showed even more improvement. Soon, she learned to make faces, heads, and other figures from clay sculptures. Conclusion. After reading this book, you would have learned a few things. First, our brain is a soft organ, but incredibly powerful in controlling our entire body. Second, any injury in the brain can potentially affect other parts of the body. Third, even a small injury or trauma in the brain can become a serious problem. Lastly, learning about these rare conditions of the brain helps us understand patients with these problems. Their lives are filled with challenges. The least we can do is treat them with kindness and gentleness, and we should encourage them. Just because these patients have a rare condition or disease doesn't mean their lives are ruined. They have as much right to live a happy and successful life as anyone else, with support from their family and friends. And that wraps up our journey into the extraordinary world of the human brain with Dr. Oliver Sacks. It's incredible to think about the challenges faced by those with neurological conditions, but even more so, the remarkable adaptability and resilience of the human spirit they demonstrate. Stories like Mrs. B's and Madeline's not only expand our understanding, but also deepen our empathy and appreciation for the mind's profound mysteries. If this video sparked your curiosity or touched your heart, I encourage you to dive deeper and maybe even read the full book. Trust me, it's a journey worth taking. And if you enjoyed our summary and discussion today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content that opens the mind and heart. We love hearing from you, so please leave your thoughts, experiences, or any questions you have in the comments below. Until next time, keep wondering, keep exploring, and never stop learning.